It's time, once again, to visit the final frontier of classic Star Trek. And in this episode, titled A Dagger of the Mind, we explore the horrors of mental illness and the abuse of power. In this particular episode, the obstacle to overcome for Kirk and his crew is just that, the abuse of power. Because often there are people who suffer from mental disabilities or disorders and what have you, and this is often very painful and personal, and you have to entrust the authority of others to help you regain control of your own thoughts and self. And it's a difficult thing to do because the fear of losing control of yourself from yourself can be compounded by losing control to someone else. And that's exactly what happens in this episode. For you see, the Enterprise is sending supplies to a penal colony that is set up to treat people with mental disorders. But one of the inmates escapes and sneaks on board the Enterprise and cleverly changes his blue pajamas for a pair of red pajama uniform in an attempt to blend in with the crew and escape. However, this doesn't work, and soon Kirk contacts the penal colony and informs them that they have one of their inmates on board and has attacked members of his crew. However, it turns out, shockingly, that this inmate was actually one of the doctors from the facility, and the current head of the facility informs Kirk that through an experimental procedure to help people with their disorders, he lost control and is now a hopelessly violent man, unable to control himself. In fact, at times, when they ask him his name, he seems to go into violent convulsions, unable to speak it. This piques the curiosity of Dr. McCoy and Mr. Spock. They investigate further, and Kirk himself does a routine required investigation of the facility himself. And as luck would have it, he's accompanied by a female psychiatrist who is clearly, if not the hottest, one of the hottest women to visit the series. Oh yes, she's great. So anyway, Kirk and the doctor beam down to take a look at the facility. I gotta say, the initial turbo lift or elevator ride down below to the facility was enough to give anyone a psychotic reaction, and how scary it was. They probably should look into that. But then you find, well, not all is what it seems. The rest of the staff seem to be in a zombie-like state, except for the director himself, who seems quite the friendly gentleman and assures Captain Kirk that everything's fine and it was all a misunderstanding and an accident by the good doctor's attempts to make a new procedure work and experiment it on himself to his unfortunate detriment. Meanwhile, aboard the Enterprise, the former facility doctor is informing Spock and Dr. McCoy that the captain and the psychiatrist are in grave danger, but he can't explain exactly why due to convulsive pain. The only way for them to understand if he's even telling the truth is for Mr. Spock to use the Vulcan mind meld. It is of some interest to note that this is the first time that Star Trek demonstrated Spock's ability to virtually read minds by melding with them. Back down below on the penal colony, Kirk has decided he wants to investigate this bizarre device that was used to try to cure certain mental disorders and yet had the opposite effect on the poor doctor. The contraption, if you will, consisted of a room with a penetrating light that beamed upon the subject as they sat in a chair not unlike that of a chair you would find in a dentist's office, which should have been Kirk's first clue of sinister trouble ahead. Suddenly the psychiatrist is taken captive and the evil head of the facility begins to torment Kirk and manipulate his mind with the device, forcing him to believe that he's fallen in love with the psychiatrist, which I don't see why you would need a machine. She's quite the beautiful woman. I mean, you really got to see this girl. She's really hot. Needless to say, it's all downhill from there, as Spock and McCoy learn the truth from the deranged doctor on board through the mind meld, but they can't get to the penal colony because there's a force field around the planet, blocking the ability of the transporter to beam anyone down. Kirk and the good psychiatrist know this, and they have to figure out a way to turn off the shielding screen so that they can beam down from the Enterprise and rescue them. So Kirk once again goes to another torture session with the evil doctor of the facility, while the sexy psychiatrist slips around through the air-conditioned vents of the facility that, yes, once again are big enough for someone to fit through, and she's able to do what she needed to do and turn down the facility, and Spock beams in, and, well, they're all saved. Meanwhile, the idiot doctor gets knocked out and lands in front of the light, and when the power comes back on, it literally drains his mind of all thought, and, well, he dies. Later on board the Enterprise, Kirk is informed that the deranged doctor is now head of the facility, which I thought was a bit odd. You would think it would take a long time for him to recover, considering the state of madness he was in. But he did promise that the torture machine would be destroyed. So there's that. Kirk, of course, is often quiet and solemn because, well, he got tortured, but come on, he was tortured with visions of getting it on with that hot psychiatrist. But, well, whatever. One could conclude that Kirk didn't lose his mind totally, because he was already somewhat attracted to the psychiatrist, as they indicated they had a previous encounter at a Christmas party, and it was somewhat embarrassing for Kirk. And yet, well, the fantasy vision was far more enjoyable, wasn't it? So, yes, it explains why he didn't go completely mad, as what the facility's doctor did. God only knows what they were forcing him to do. Well, of course, forcing him to go against his medical oath and to use the device for all the wrongs and for the increasing desires of power that the facility director had in mind for it. And so this was a tougher burden upon this doctor, whereas Kirk, well, just got to play with a romantic fantasy. So you can understand why he didn't lose his marbles.
So anyway, a good episode, very solid. Probably not one of the ones that people look at as, oh man, that was a classic, but, well-rounded and to the point. And, the morality lesson of the abuse of power. And power is the enemy. If you're not limiting it, you're part of the problem. So, a good episode of Star Trek. Join me again as I review another classic episode. But before we get to that, I will do another Doctor Who episode. I swap them in and out. That's how it works. Before I go, I will say a word on the passing of D.C. Fontana. There were several, not just Gene Roddenberry, that would be considered the creators of Star Trek, and she's certainly one of them. The others being the fathers of Star Trek, she's certainly the mother of Star Trek. And the strides she made there and the foundations that she built for Star Trek that made it what it was and what it became is for everyone who enjoys science fiction in general, and of course Star Trek, will be eternally grateful to the efforts of D.C. Fontana. May she rest in peace. Thank you for watching and listening. Say, why not like and subscribe, and check out that link description below. Yeah, what are you waiting for? That have my mini stores that have plenty of goodies for you. Yeah, that's right. And also, subscribe to me at BitChute. You just never know what's to become of YouTube these days. So, yeah, find me at BitChute. Bye-bye.